Hello everyone, welcome back to Upside Down Data. Today I want to talk a little bit about what the heck happened yesterday in the market. This was a very bloody day. I think we all felt this very keenly, and I think there's a lot to talk about with this one, but I want to talk about one thing in particular that a lot of people have been talking about as part of the reason why Bitcoin capitulated so much yesterday. So obviously, there's been a lot of macro pressure, a lot of macro uncertainty that's been pushing Bitcoin down. Bitcoin has been really falling off hard ever since the FOMC Fed meeting earlier on, just a few days ago this month. And then yesterday was kind of a crescendo in some ways. Not to say it's the end. We don't know if this is really the end of this capitulation, but it was certainly a capitulation down to retest the summer 2021 lows, dropping over 11% to the downside. And what a lot of people are talking about as being the reason that this happened was UST, the algorithmic stablecoin native to Terra, depegging from the US dollar, falling all the way down to around 60 cents, where obviously it's supposed to be always pegged to $1. So if you're not familiar with the way that UST works, essentially it's the way the system set up is that you are always able to mint 1 UST for $1 if you burn $1 worth of Luna. So you can burn $1 worth of Luna, mint 1 UST. Then you're supposed to always be able to also burn $1 or 1 UST for $1 worth of Luna. So even if UST were to be down at 60 cents, the idea is you'd be able to burn that 1 UST for $1 worth of Luna. And so the way it's supposed to keep its peg is through arbitrage, basically. The idea being that if UST ever does fall below $1, the idea is that people should be burning UST to then turn it into Luna, to then sell that Luna for $1 and keep the profit, which then shrinks the supply of UST, and then that's supposed to keep the peg stable. But what can happen is that if you get a massive wall of sell pressure, that can end up throwing it off its peg faster than arbitrage can try to pull it back up. Essentially, my understanding is there's a speed limit, more or less, of how quickly UST can be converted into Luna. So if the pressure to do that is so massive at once, it will override the ability to do that. And so what ended up happening yesterday, you might ask, how is this connected to Bitcoin? Well, the Luna Foundation Guard, which is an entity that was created to try to kind of help maintain the peg of UST, essentially. What they had been doing for the past couple months was acquiring a massive reserve of Bitcoin that they were going to use to collateralize UST. Their idea was to create this kind of reserve fund of Bitcoin that they could then step in with to try to stabilize the peg should it ever be at risk of depegging. So yesterday, that's exactly what happened. So as UST was depegging, a lot of people were first going into Luna, trying to convert into Luna. You can see the price of Luna just absolutely capitulating, absolutely tanking. Probably both on the sell pressure just coming from people trying to get out of UST and then market selling their Luna. But then also just Luna holders probably dumping out also, thinking that the price is going to crash further. So Luna dumped over 50%. But then the Luna Foundation Guard stepped in also with their Bitcoin reserves. And there were different mechanisms that they used to try to save the peg. But essentially they were just deploying they ended up deploying the entire Bitcoin reserve to try to save the peg of UST. Basically deploying all that Bitcoin to try to kind of buy back UST to prop the price up. It wasn't enough. They exhausted virtually their entire supply of Bitcoin, and it wasn't enough. UST still depegged quite precipitously. Now, as I record this, UST has recovered from the lows of 60 cents to now 89 cents as I record this. But I still think it's an open question of, will this be able to get back up to its peg? Some people are very optimistic. Some people are very pessimistic. We're really going to have to wait and see. But the good news is that kind of artificial sell pressure on Bitcoin from that whole situation with UST and Terra and Luna, that artificial sell pressure has been relieved because the Luna Foundation Guard is exhausted more or less their Bitcoin reserves. And that might be partly why we're seeing a bit of a bounce in Bitcoin. Now, you tend to see these bounces happen after big capitulations anyway. So for example, if we look back here in the May capitulation, you'll often see green days follow. So I'm personally not getting too excited looking at this. This tends to happen oftentimes. But it might be part of the reason why this didn't go deeper, was because that sell pressure got exhausted. The Luna Foundation Guard was effectively dumping tens of thousands of Bitcoin onto the market. It wasn't exactly that way. was a little more complicated the way that they were deploying their Bitcoin. But that's effectively the effect it was having. And that then you can see why this would capitulate so deeply, so quickly. Now, if we're thinking about what this means for Luna and UST, one thing that remains concerning is that the market cap for UST, or $16.7 billion, is higher than the market cap for Luna at $12.2 billion. And the idea being there that if Luna is supposed to be acting as this backdrop for UST, where you can convert one UST into $1 worth of Luna at any time, there's it's effectively more UST out there than liquidity exists in Luna, and that's concerning. That means that there's a huge bank run. There's not enough in Luna its own to at all be able to save any kind of peg of UST. And I think that's part of the concern that we are seeing here. And so what this means for Luna is that, not financial advice, to navigate this however you see fit, but I personally don't think that this is at all necessarily the bottom for Luna here. That there's going to be continued sell pressure as long as UST remains below its peg. There's going to be arbitrage people are trying to take advantage. And as fast as they can do it, it's going to continue to have sell pressure on Luna right here. But again, as I mentioned, the good news here is that the worst should be over for Bitcoin in that context. At least there's not going to be this artificial sell pressure being created by the Luna Foundation Guard like there was, or at least not to the same degree as there was before. So my short-term outlook on Bitcoin is that I don't know if these lows are going to hold. Joe put out a great video yesterday that if these summer lows break, there's a lot of free air to fall down, and so it's very conceivable the price of Bitcoin could fall quite a bit further should we break decisively below these levels. We have to wait and see. Part of it in the short term might depend a little bit about what happens with inflation. The CPI print for April is going to be released on Wednesday, or tomorrow, I should say. And so if that comes out favorable, if that comes out lower certainly than March, but especially if it came out lower than expected, markets could react favorably, because that might mean that the Fed won't have to be as hawkish as they've been signaling to deal with inflation. But certainly if that CPI print is not favorable, then that could create even more capitulation in the markets. And we're just seeing markets across the board, not doing well. The stock market is capitulating, the bond market's doing horribly. The macro picture is terrible, and then this whole UST situation was kind of the cherry on top, which is probably then what ended up culminating in this massive crash we saw in Bitcoin, and frankly across the crypto space. So we're going to have to wait and see what happens. One thing with Luna and UST is, who knows, memory is short with crypto. It's very possible that these could eventually recover, but I'm not making any strong predictions one way or the other. Not financial advice, of course. I'm personally extremely cautious with Luna. I don't see it being especially, I see it as being an incredibly high risk asset right now, just because this depegging of UST has really shaken confidence in the project, I think. But again, memory is short, so we don't know if that's actually going to doom the project or not. I'll leave that up to you to make a determination of what you think is going to happen down the line. But certainly this kind of systemic risk being able to exist in crypto is not going to be a great look for institutional investors, for example, who they're not going to look at this favorably. I don't think any like a pension fund, for example, isn't going to want to deploy a bunch of capital into a space that can have one of the kind of premier projects just implode and destroy billions of dollars worth of value in a single day. So who knows? Different people have different takes on that. Some people will say it's not being a big deal. Some people will say it's a huge deal. Again, I'll leave it up to you to make that determination. So in the short run, personally, what I'm going to be looking at is I'm not really going to be getting too excited with what Bitcoin does in terms of moves back to the upside, unless it's able to flip above critical levels that some of our indicators, like the trend confidence indicator, which is looking at around 39K as being a critical level, or the market direction classifier, the new indicator we just launched, is looking a little bit higher than that, a little bit above 40K. As long as we're down in the doldrums below that, personally, I'm not going to be getting too excited. But again, you should take the data as you will. All right, if you like the content, remember to subscribe to the channel, give the video a like, and follow us on Twitter. Put a lot of updates about our indicators and more over there.